What we saw was a landfill of debris. The whole town was covered in debris. They brought in front end loaders to clear the streets and push the debris to the side, but the debris was everywhere. We are nowhere near normal. Our new normal is not going to be. We don't even know what it's going to look like. It's going to take us a year and a half to get back to where we were.
12 hours of flooding was unheard of here. So we tried what we could, but of course, Mother Nature always wins at the end.
Hurricane Idalia was yet another I-named storm to make landfall in the U.S. But the 2023 hurricane season was different than recent years because of one major factor: El Nino. Here to talk more about this is Nat Johnson, meteorologist at NOAA's GFDL. So Nat, thanks for your time. You know, the big headline late last year or through last year was the development of El Nino, finally breaking out of that La Nina. So how so far has that translated to what folks are seeing at home?
We were anxious to see a change after 3 years of La Nina. And we have seen some changes. So El Nino, like La Nina, it tends to modify the large-scale atmospheric circulation and influence the weather in places like the U.S., especially for the wintertime. Typically, for example, during La Ninas, we have cool conditions over the northern tier of the U.S., and we did see that over the Pacific Northwest, whereas during El Nino, it tends to be warmer than average, and like we have seen so far to start this winter. Of course, that doesn't include occasional Arctic outbreaks. Also, we've seen changes in the precipitation. So during La Nina, we tend to have drier conditions over the southern tier of the U.S., especially the southeast. And that's what we saw in places like Florida, very dry winters during the La Nina conditions, whereas we've had a much wetter start this year.
As we head through the winter of 23-24, where do we stand? Has El Nino already peaked on the observations?
Yeah, it looks like we are right at the peak of this El Nino. It's currently a strong El Nino. It's the strongest since the winter of 2015-2016, and it's a top 5 El Nino since 1950. But we expect that this El Nino is going to start to fizzle in the near future. This is a very typical evolution for a strong El Nino. They peak and then they flame out quickly, just based on how the conditions evolve throughout the season. And then the heat builds up in the tropics and then quickly gets dissipated away from the tropics. And so we see this transition.
So does it appear that El Nino still could impact the rest of winter for early 2024?
Right. So even though El Nino itself may weaken, the impacts of El Nino should continue. And in fact, a lot of times we see our strongest impacts from January through March. So even if El Nino itself weakens, we expect to continue to see El Nino impacts throughout the rest of the winter and perhaps even into spring. So
far in 2024 January, we've had these powerful storms. Is that any impact of what's going on in the ocean?
There may be some impact, particularly in terms of El Nino tends to really amplify the subtropical jet through the southern tier of the U.S. And that, of course, impacts storms throughout the eastern U.S. But there's also, we have to realize that there are many factors that are, separate from El Nino. I mean, there's chaotic weather, whether we have El Nino or not. Not everything that we see can be tied to the El Nino that we're having.
Okay, so Nat, are you looking ahead to this summer? Because I know it's only in the winter, but everybody looks to the tropical season, what's going on in the Pacific. So are you looking out to this summer of 2024 yet?
In our forecast, we look out right now to early fall. So of course, our confidence in our predictions diminishes as we go farther out in time, but we are looking out that far. And currently, as you mentioned, we expect to transition to ENSO neutral by summer, perhaps even late spring. And then looks like more likely than not, we will transition to La Nina by early fall. Keep in mind that, El Nino will tend to tilt the odds in favor of particular weather outcomes, but there's always other wild cards at play. We can't discount the role of just the chaotic nature of our weather.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nat, for your time today.